Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here. So we're starting this week with chapter 14 of our world history book. So make sure you have it, and that is through MindTap. So again, you will get an access code, and then you'll read it through Blackboard like I'm doing right now. And just a side note, when we're using MindTap, if you run into something like an exercise or questions that you're supposed to do for points or whatever, that means I didn't turn it off. So that's a mistake. Again, quizzes and essays are all we do in this class. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention. The exercises in MindTap, for the most part, we're not using, at least in this part of the class. So to bring that to your attention, make sure you have the access code. And assuming you do, then you're going to be reading chapter 14 this week. And you're going to have a quiz this week as well. And I trust that you were aware of that. And from the syllabus, you remember that we have 8 quizzes, and they're 50 points apiece, and they're really easy. And I will give you the answers as we go through this video, which hopefully will take 10 minutes. I'm reversed, 10 minutes or less. So our class starts in 1500. It's world history from 1500, so that's about, what, 500 years ago, not that long ago. And so it's basically contemporary history. It goes back a little farther. And I teach contemporary history also, which generally starts around 1900, which is a good starting place because it's sort of industrialization and invention of all this cool stuff. But 1500, so 400 years earlier or whatever, is a great place to start studying world history also, because we can start to understand the modern world more in the context of how we live today, with no monarchies of note, no kings and queens of note, in some places, of course, but for the most part, not. Sort of this society, whether you're in China or whether you're in the U.S., where there is some degree of autonomy, to some extent, individual choice to some extent. So there's that. So 1500 is a good time to start, because this idea of sort of Enlightenment thought and breaking away from the confines of a monarchy or from the confines of a church are a big deal. The other huge part of it is, and the reason our chapter is, I think the name of it is Age of Exploration, but I'm not sure. But it's about the Age of Exploration. And so why are we starting in 1500? Why it's a big deal? All you have to remember is what happened. Columbus, right? So, Columbus sails to the New World in 1492, sort of the first time these worlds start to come together. And typically we talk about Columbus going to the New World, so, the sort of the beginning of European colonization of North America, where we live now. But and then, African slavery and all that stuff happening. But at the same time, the other part of the history is the Muslim empires and the Portuguese, and how they sail basically south around the west coast of Africa down into the Indian Ocean, and really kind of control those trade routes. The Portuguese do, and deal with Muslim traders that are getting basically spices from China. So there's all this stuff going on, and the reason it is because shipping begins to be perfected. Now, not shipping like you and I know it, but Columbus's boat, small wooden boats. For the first time ever, they had a way to sail against the wind by tacking a certain way, and they had basic navigation instruments. So with the introduction of some navigation and some knowledge, and actually the knowledge and acceptance for the first time that the world wasn't flat, it's the age of exploration, because these Europeans now all of a sudden are sailing everywhere, and most of it's sponsored by a king or a queen. So certainly Columbus was. And when you read the chapter and you read about Portugal, you see this idea of mercantilism, or sort of a nationalism. So most of these great explorations are funded by kings and queens, and some of them, there are companies that are formed, Dutch East India Company, that sort of thing. But again, sorry to go crazy off track. The point is, it's the age of exploration. The other cool thing that happened is 1444, the printing press is invented in Mainz, Germany, by Johann Gutenberg, so that's a huge deal. All of a sudden, the illiteracy that is everywhere because no one's literate, because no one can read, because there's no printed material, something that we can't imagine. All of a sudden, that starts to change over a period of a few hundred years. So you have that. You have the Reformation. I don't know if we get into the Reformation in the next chapter, but if we don't, I'll talk about it. So there's just a lot of stuff going on. So read through it and, understand the really big points. So understand that, the Portuguese play a really important role in world history in the time that we're talking about. So the reason they do is, in some sense, they sort of invent modern slavery, if you will, in some way. So when you go through the reading, you'll read about the Azores and Madeira Islands and some of these other islands where these first sugar plantations were started by the Portuguese. So they play an important role and really could sail, but they just weren't a big or rich enough country to sustain their dominance. But still, the national language of Brazil is Portuguese, so they're influential. Or the language is influential. So know that Portuguese, play an important role, and know that religion and nationalism are at the heart of a lot of these expeditions. In a lot of cases, it's like, hey, we're going to go spread, Christianity, or we're going to go find gold for the crown, or we're going to go profit for our company. But none of these expeditions were like, hey, cool, let's go exploring. It was all, for a purpose, usually of getting rich. And then the other thing is, note that Magellan, sailed around the world in the 1500s, which is amazing. No modern communications, nothing. No motors, no power, no steam, all wind. And then also keep in mind the importance of the English and the Dutch. So if you remember, I think it was our history primer, I talked about continents and countries. So I get my trusty globe out and I'm trying to make it deal with the camera, and I'm not doing a there we go, job at it. Plus it's all reversed, I can see in the camera anyway. But again, this is Europe where my hand is, and I know you can't see very well. And this is the Atlantic out here. So the U.S. is, back way over that way, right over here. So anyway, just understand that these European nations really start these expeditions early. So that's another big thing that's going on. And then so one of the quiz questions is that I made up was, hey, who would you consider the superpowers of this era? So when you go through the reading, you need to figure out, who are the superpowers of the day. And I define that by the people who are controlling the trade routes on the ocean, the European countries that are, exploiting foreign lands and setting up plantations and that sort of thing. So the superpowers, all right, can be any of these countries: Portugal, Spain, England, Holland. Okay, I would say those European countries are the superpowers of the era. And so that question's on the quiz, so make sure you get that one right. And the other thing you should know is the invention of the caravel. It's a kind of sail on a ship that helps you sail really into the wind, so you can kind of tack against the wind. And again, I'm not a sailor. You don't need to know any of that, but just understand, people just didn't start exploring because they were bored. They started exploring because they had the technology to do it. And I mentioned before, basic navigation stuff, and then the caravel. Okay, so now let's get to the quiz. Where are we at on my timer? I'm down to about 3 minutes. I might go a little over, but I'm going to go through the quiz because it's super easy. I'm going to give you the questions and the answers. So if you watch the video, great. If not, not so good. So all right, so they're perfect. I'm looking at the quiz, and these questions get mixed up sometimes, but the superpowers one I just talked about is important. So understand that if I say, who are the European superpowers of the era we're studying, understand, first of all, I said European, so we know it's not like India. We know it's not like the Americas. We know it's not China. We know, that's, so think about these questions. They're super easy, but go through the reading. And what's the reading talking about? It's talking about Spanish and Portuguese and all these sailors. So it, not rocket science. And then here's another question. Who was Hernando Cortez? and who cares, right? But so I think it's important you know who Cortez is, just because it's sort of an interesting story. I don't know that it's like life changing, or it's going to help you find work down the road, but I think it's a good thing to know, because we need to understand how civilizations change. Giant, sophisticated civilization. So Cortez was sort of the how can I say this? In a really crude way, but just metaphorically, is sort of the Columbus of Mexico, if you will. So Cortez, like I think 30 years after Columbus, sails into the Gulf of Mexico, into Mexico. And what is in Mexico at that time is the Aztec civilization, like not a small thing. Again, this is not going back that long ago, okay? Hundreds of years, not thousands. So the Aztecs, are the very rich, very sophisticated, very big civilization in Mexico, and what is today Mexico. And Cortez is the guy who makes the first European contact with the Aztecs, and the long and short of it is wipes out the entire civilization. And so there's that, but you know who Cortez is, because we should know these things. Mexico just doesn't pop up overnight. There's a really exciting history to the country, and certainly Cortez plays an important role in that. So know that, just for the heck of it. We need to know in historical context how things work. And I think there's a question about Cortez. What did he do? So read it carefully, think Mexico and Aztecs, you're good to go. And then there's another kind of silly question. It says, hey, we just read about the Age of Exploration, so about when was that? And I think I said at one point in an intro, I'm not into dates that much, but let's just leave it at that. Make sure you know the big picture. So what time period are we talking about here? It might not be well defined in the book, but you kind of get the idea. If they're talking about Columbus, if they're talking about Cortez, and Columbus sailed in 1492, again, this isn't rocket science, or rocket surgery, as someone used to say. All right, next question. Know about slavery and Africa. And again, in the context of the reading, you're going to read, the beauty of this brief edition of MindTap that we're using is these things you're going to read are like a paragraph or two, but read about Africa and slavery. Make sure you get that part. And there's something about it on the quiz. It's a big, broad, general question, so don't make notes or not. It might say something like, hey, did slavery exist here at that time, or whatever. So again, don't worry about that one. And then lastly, there's a weird question on the quiz. And I go through the quiz because I want to call your attention to things that I think are relevant to the context of today. Yes, I went past my time. I'm ending it. So the last question on the quiz was about Southeastern Asian society in the 1500s. So why the heck would I put that on the quiz? What good does this do us at all to learn about Southeast Asian society in the 1500s? So anywhere between the Philippines or Vietnam, Laos, those areas. One of the things I found fascinating when I was first reading this history, and I'm not a scholar of Asia, but the fact that in the 1500s in Southeast Asia, women had this incredibly high degree of freedom and status. You could get divorced, you could get half of the estate, all of these sort of modern liberal ideas about gender. And I just find it fascinating because this is in the 1500s. All right, women in the United States weren't even allowed to vote until 1920. All right, so again, I think this is a useful part of history. Hey, we're not so sophisticated after all. There's a lot of civilizations that came before us that really knew what they were doing. So don't be on your high and mighty American high horse all the time. So I thought that was cool about Southeast Asia. So I put a question on the quiz, and it's section 14-5B of your book. So just read that. It's kind of cool, and think about today. So sorry I went way over time. Have a great day. If you have any questions, let me know. See you guys soon. Great luck on the quiz. Bye-bye.